This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 394 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. We are talking about unusual accommodation today. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast. So this episode is all about the places that you might end up sleeping on your travels that are, I guess, not a traditional hotel bed. This might be good or it might be bad. We've got all sorts. I think the most unusual accommodation I've used in recent years was a capsule hotel in Tokyo. So on our way to hike in Tohoku a couple of years ago, my friend Catherine and I had a night to stay over in Tokyo. We just really needed to sleep and then get on our way the next day. So we thought, okay, this is our chance to try out a capsule hotel. Both out of interest and because it was good for the budget as well. Now, when I posted photos of my capsule, a lot of people said to me that it looked very claustrophobic or like having an MRI in the hospital or something. But honestly, it was a great way to sleep. It was very comfortable and truly quite cozy. I guess the only downside was that because all the capsules are, of course, next to and on top of each other, they had a no talking rule, which I understand. But Catherine and I had to try hard to remember that when we were coming and going because we do like to have a chat. But we did then just revert to messaging each other from inside our individual capsules, and it was fine. I'll include some photos of the capsule hotel in the show notes. So, on to some other tales of unusual accommodation. My first guest is Tim Geisler, who now runs a business training people to sail, but before that did many different kinds of travel. I started out asking Tim about any examples he had of more unusual places he had stayed while traveling.
There's quite a few of these. Definitely some weird ones. I don't think they would actually fall under the category accommodation for some of them. I think there was, back in the day, I don't know if in Australia, if you guys have the term, but we have the term dirt bagging here, where dirt bagging is like if you're a traveling surfer or traveling whatever, dirt bagging just means you're living rough with barely anything. Okay. And you're just kind of dirt bag, sleeping in the dirt kind of thing. So there were definitely lots of accommodations, sleeping on a tarp on the beach in Mexico. Many, many of those. I was on a bus once in Nicaragua, making my way back from Costa Rica all the way back to California on buses, and pulled into this tiny town in Nicaragua, and the one hotel in town was full when we got there. So I didn't know what to do. And the bus driver, he's like, "Tim, I've got a second hammock. We'll string it under the bus." So we had hammocks strung under the bus and just this torrential downpour the whole night. But it was so cool swinging under the bus with the rain kind of cascading all around and this Nicaraguan bus driver snoring merrily beside me. That was definitely an interesting accommodation.
How is there space under the bus?
I know, it was pretty tight, but these buses in Nicaragua would go on these dirt roads, these little remote towns. So they were a little more lifted up. It wasn't like a traditional school bus, so they were a little higher to clear rocks and things. So we were pretty close to the ground, but at least we could kind of get a hammock under there. So that was one. And then there was another time in Costa Rica where we were on a surf trip way down out in the middle of the jungle and spent a couple nights, and we were just sleeping in our board bags, and it just started raining heavily one night. So we decided to kind of play survivor, and we tried weaving palm fronds together to kind of make a temporary hut over ourselves. It was not very dry, and we had these little kind of orange and purple crabs that kept crawling up into our board bags, and you would wake up just feeling something on you and freaking out. So I don't think we slept much that night, so I don't know if you could really call it accommodation, but those were the three probably most unusual places or accommodations I've had. I wouldn't want to do them now for sure, Amanda,
awful.
Right? I'm a little too old, and I kind of like my bed nowadays. A mattress is kind of nice.
I think so too. I mean, I don't mind, I've slept in some pretty dodgy hostels and stuff over the years, but I have definitely never slept under a bus. Now tell me more about where you sleep now.
So now, I've slept, we started a sailing company about 17 years ago, and we help introduce people to sailing and help people embark kind of on their sailing adventures. And it's been a neat shift for me where, I love travel, and sailing has just become this ultimate platform for adventure and discovery. It's a back way into cultures and places where you're kind of coming in through a back door. So it's an amazing place to travel. So I've traveled a lot on boats, spent a lot of time in little tiny cabins, sleeping up on deck and down below, and trampolines on catamarans and things like that. But again, most of the time, you're anchored in these beautiful places with white sand beaches and all that. So it really doesn't seem like a hardship, sleeping on the deck of a boat when you're in a gorgeous, Caribbean island or something like
lovely.
that.
Yes. A bit of adaptability goes a long way when you are finding somewhere to sleep, and enjoying the surroundings can make it all
really
fine.
Does. That's right. It's worth the sacrifice if you're in a stunning place.
Oh, I love that. It's worth the sacrifice if you're in a stunning place. Absolutely true. Yeah, I don't really have any need for luxury at all, but I definitely need a bit more comfort than when I was in my 20s. I've never done much dirt bagging. That's a term I learnt from Tim. But I've definitely had some pretty rough and uncomfortable nights to save money, the kind that I would now try seriously hard to avoid, I think. One simple one that springs to mind, actually, is a night in the airport in Vienna in Austria. I was living in Bratislava at the time, right nearby, and we had flown back in from a trip to Tunisia. But there was heavy snow and it had delayed all of the flights landing. Anyway, by the time we landed in Vienna, all of the trains or buses back to Bratislava had finished for the night. So it was midnight, I think. And rather than spending money getting accommodation in Vienna until the morning, which is what I would do today, we just slept on the plastic benches of the McDonald's at the airport. It was closed, so we just slept there. And I remember it being surprisingly comfortable, weirdly enough. But I do remember the cleaning staff woke us up at about 5 a.m. and that was quite annoying. But yeah, these days, if that happened to me, I would definitely be looking for an actual bed. Now, my next guest is James Ward, and as part of his role leading conservation-focused safaris in a few places around the world, he also needs to travel to check out potential new accommodation for his guests, including in some very remote places.
Last year, I spent a week touring Tierra del Fuego with a friend, and it was one of those places you have to rent a pickup, you're putting extra gas cans in the back and just driving. And we were staying at a lodge. It was probably the southernmost lodge in Chilean Patagonia. But they didn't really give us directions of how to get there. And we had a boat tour. It was two of us were going out to see glaciers in the fjords. And so we left where we were staying, like 5 a.m. to get there at 7. And we get to this beach. The road ends at a beach. And we're like, where are we? Like, there's nothing here. So we look, and there's a pickup truck and like a camper and two people sitting up. I was like, oh, that must be it. So we drive on the beach to go to them, and they say, follow us. So it's the captain only speaks Spanish. His first mate is French, and we're both American who don't speak either of those two languages. So it was enjoyable, and there's not like there's internet connection to try to figure this out. So we follow them along the beach. We get to like a cliff going up, and we just drive along it. And there's, the water's right to our right. And then we drive out and we get to like a different beach. The boat's moored there. We're looking around at one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, if not the most beautiful. Mountains everywhere, glaciers, it was basically the start of snow. So we call it in Alaska is termination dust. So it's the termination of summer because now the first snow is falling on the tops of the mountains. Nice. And the guy says, oh, and that's where you're staying tonight. And we're looking and all we see are woods. And we're like, what do you mean? They're like, yeah, your place is back there. And so we're like, okay. So we do the tour. We come back. They drive us up to the lodge it's behind the trees. So thankfully they built it naturally. They hadn't taken trees down.
Wow.
But then they start talking to us and they're like, well, when are you leaving? And we're like, well, we have to leave really early, say Tuesday morning. And like, you guys need to check the tide charts. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, if it's high tide, you can't get out. So that place where we were at the cliff at high tide, you can't drive through that.
Right.
So I looked at my buddy. I was like, we had no idea. What would have happened if nobody told us how to get there? If we had just showed up on this beach and there's water, we would never have seen any way to drive, and we would have found this place. And we'd have been like, we're 7 hours from anywhere at this point. So then we go up to the lodge. There's one person who works at the lodge. Very nice. She's asked to do everything, but it's obvious she is she likes to be alone, right? And she's in the middle of nowhere, the only person at a lodge,
Oh, no.
but she's also not like technical. And the lodge is powered by generator, but she doesn't know how to work the generators. So the generators would go out, and thankfully we know how to work the generator, so we would start it. But I was like, what would you do if we didn't know this?
Yeah, exactly.
So then they put us in a room, and now this is April in Patagonia, so you're just getting into winter. It's cold. She's like, at 11 o'clock, we shut the generators for the night. And we're like, okay, well, does the heat still work? She's like, no, heat's electric. So like, okay. So we blast our heat and try it. But the rooms are not really well insulated. So at 2 a.m, it is cold. And then you wake up. So the generators go back on at like 6, 7 when you wake up. So you're like, okay, I'll take a hot shower. Well, the regulator in the shower wasn't working well. So it's either scalding hot or you basically had to take cold showers. So you're like, well, I can't do that. But I will tell you, with all of that, the food that she cooked was unreal. It was so good. I mean, fresh seafood, everything about it was fantastic. I will still say it's one of my favorite lodges I've ever been to. With all of that, because it was like in a week we saw 2 other people.
Oh, fabulous.
We had a king penguin come up on the beach, and it was just my buddy and I and a king penguin, right?
Amazing.
I mean, the tour out to see the glaciers, we saw elephant seals. We were standing 360 glaciers, and it was just my buddy and I and the captain, first mate. And I was like, there are not many places in the world that you can do this. So it was interesting that it's just this lodge in the middle of nowhere. But again, for me, it's about experiential luxury. Now, I wouldn't send most of my travelers there, but for those who are like, I want more of a rugged experience, I tell them that's the spot. Any place, again, as I mentioned, I love bush camps, but I was just at some bush camps in Zambia where the tents were basically mesh netting, so almost screens. And I was in North Luangwa National Park, which is a conservation success story, but new. The wildlife there is really wild because there's not a lot of tourism there. They're not habituated. And so I'm sitting in this tent and it's a full moon. So now I can see 360 views of the area, and the big bull elephant comes right up. And I'm saying, I could have reached out and pet the thing. And just watching this. And then the bathrooms were like it was fenced, but it's outdoor bathroom, but fenced. So it's private, but no ceiling. So all I'm thinking there is I see the elephant come in and put his trunk in, sniffing, and there's water in the bucket shower. There's water in the sink. Like it's like a bucket sink. And I'm like, oh my God, he might take my toothpaste. He could take my toothbrush, like anything, because he's just smelling.
Yeah.
But it was basically like the only thing is this really thin screen between you and the wildlife, and just seeing this monstrous bull elephant, who I know is now not used to people. So it was an amazing experience for me. And I've been to Africa 50 plus times. That experience to me in that camp, I love it. And I tell everyone, this is the type of tent you want. I actually tell people who are building camps, like, please use this type of tent, because it just gets you closer to the wildlife.
But I'd need someone like you there to really reassure me before I went to bed that night.
So it's funny. So I spent 30 days in Zambia. I was touring all over. The last 10 days, I had friends, my wife and friends came, and we were in these types of tents. And most of them, it was their first trip to Africa. And I was nervous.
Right.
Okay, how are they going to do with it? And yeah, some of them would come up the first morning, you tell. They didn't sleep as well. But every one of them said this, I wouldn't do it any other way. And I had, some of the people that were on the trip could have stayed at any camp they wanted to. Price wouldn't have been an issue. And they said, I love this bush camp. I would stay in this type of place, because the experiences that we had, I mean, they had lions next to the tent. They had one place the elephants slept outside that bathroom, a mother and baby elephant laying down sleeping next to their tent. We were at dinner at one of the camps, and lions came through camp. And so we just watched them walk through. And so, it's sad. For those who haven't been on safari, haven't experienced, like, that's crazy. When you're there, and again, this is part of, as you're there, you realize, these animals aren't out to kill every human that's anywhere. They're living their lives, and you're just a part of it. And if you take the proper precautions, have the right guides, you'll see that.
Yeah, so I've not yet had the good fortune of taking a safari trip in Africa, and I'm not even convinced I actually want to be this close to the wildlife. But I do like James's thinking about how accommodation that enhances your experience is more important than being luxurious, for sure. I definitely pick experience every time. Now, my final guest is Russell True, and he spent his career working in a kind of accommodation I have to confess I didn't know much about. So I was very keen to talk to him and find out more.
I think we are an unusual accommodation in the broad sense. You're at a ranch, and people say, what's a dude ranch? And my short, honest answer is a ranch that takes guests. I say it simply and generally like that because dude ranches come in such a wide variety of shapes and sizes and styles. We have ranches in Wyoming, Montana, and I'm in Arizona, and just area specifically, they don't look that much alike. Log cabins in the north and adobe and stucco and the desert in Arizona. So it's an unusual accommodation just because of where it is. They're going to look probably like wherever they are. There's a dude ranch I visited in Georgia, and it looked more like a plantation than a log cabin. And it should have. The other difference in a general sense is that at a dude ranch, you're going to step right out into it. They're usually cabins or accommodations that maybe are in 2 or 3 to a building or something like that. But almost always you're going to step out into the ranch, and that's going to mean horses, maybe cattle, and big open spaces and generally beautiful views. There are other accommodations that have that, but dude ranches almost always do. Dude ranches also, in specific, have unusual accommodations. Several dude ranches include glamping in these, high-end tents in beautiful locations again. They also sometimes have these covered wagon-type glamping accommodations. And then, like our Rancho de la Osa, our newest guest accommodation at Rancho de la Osa it's 100 years old, 102. Sometimes these ranches, a lot of times, they're pretty historic, and you might be staying where famous people stayed over the years, or even presidents, like at our ranch. And so it's unusual in a lot of regard.
I'm just curious, as an Australian, most of my listeners, more than any, are American, so they will immediately know when you say ranch exactly what is meant. But here in Australia, I'm in my head, is it more like a cattle station? Is it more like a big farm? What makes a ranch a ranch?
Well, it's going to be much more similar to your cattle station. Some, not many of the dude ranches are going to have some similarities to a farm. They may be irrigating, they may be growing. Oftentimes they're irrigating pasture for their horses or cattle or both. But more likely, much more likely, they're going to be like your cattle stations. And a lot of them, I'm in Arizona, so we're not all that dissimilar climate-wise from Australia. It's a bit arid. So the ranches are often very big to be able to get critical mass number of cattle. But some dude ranches, they're not really an ag business. They're really a tourist business. But they're a real ranch. They have real horses, probably cattle, but they may be on not a huge amount of private land. They may be using a lot of public land, and that could be state or federal and a wide variety of agencies, but they're almost always in beautiful places. They put dude ranches, they just naturally show up over the years in places people want to be.
Interesting. I guess it's like here, they need to be somewhere where there's a lot of space, and places with a lot of space often tend to be beautiful places.
Right. And sometimes it's just that, is just the expanse and the big views, and Montana calls it big sky country. Sometimes it is just that, because people in your country, our country, a lot of them live urban lives, and that's okay too. But, I like to go visit cities because I don't live in one, but they like to come visit us because they do.
That's me, absolutely. I've born and raised a city girl, but I do love to get out and see the bigger spaces. Yeah, I've been to a cattle station a long way north from here, where it's the size of the land they have is the size of Belgium, because Western Australia is so arid and so big and empty, and so they have these enormous ones. But we don't have this it's starting to have, like, we call them station stays, and it's starting to have a little bit of that culture, but nothing like what you guys have with this long-running custom of having city people come to stay?
Well, it started, as you know, over 100 years ago, really 100 and coming up 40 years ago. And, the only people who were going to leave the eastern or midwestern cities were people who could afford the time and had the money, because it was a big, long trip, and the only way you could make it work is to stay for a month or more, sometimes months at a time. And so the elite, in America, all the names we've heard of, they almost all visited dude ranches. Somebody in that family went to a dude ranch. And so they ended up shaping the West. They had the wealth, the education, the mindset. And if the West grabbed them, which of course often it did, wherever the West was, right? Maybe it was the Dakota Territory, maybe it was California, and everywhere in between. But if it really grabbed them, they either kept coming back or even in some cases moved. And the Rockefellers and the Roosevelts and all the other names that we know, particularly here in America, they ended up shaping the West because dude ranches invited them out here. And we were the first destination vacation in the West.
It was so interesting to talk to Russell about dude ranches, and there's more about the historical aspects to come in a future episode. And honestly, before we chatted, all I knew about dude ranches is what I vaguely remembered from that Billy Crystal movie, City Slickers. Actually, when I'd first learnt that I was going to interview Russell, I asked about the topic of dude ranches in the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group, and I got some very helpful answers. So, for example, Erin had explained, there is a big spectrum for a dude ranch experience, from rustic to very luxe. The City Slicker reference is valid, as many families from big cities book vacations where they have catered outdoor experiences, including horseback riding, fishing, campfire meals, etc. Definitely a cowboy theme. I think for the large part, they are ethical and humane for the animals, but I'd do my research first. So that was very useful to know. And also Jo, who is another Australian, shared her experience, and she said, I stayed in a dude ranch in Shell, Wyoming in 2019. Fantastic experience. It was a vacation with horses, and yes, I guess you are pretending to be a cowboy, but it's so much fun. The horses were beautifully looked after. We didn't just ride them, but groomed and tacked them up too. They made sure to swap out the horses every few days so that they were appropriately rested. We were the only Aussies there, possibly the only foreigners, and we met people from all over the US. Some were very experienced riders. It was excellent and a once-in-a-lifetime experience for us. But the funniest response was from Eric, and Eric said, I just can't get my head around the idea that people pay good money to do what was basically my childhood without my dad yelling at you. I love that. Very nice. Thank you so much for listening to episode 394 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I hope it's given you some new ideas for accommodation when you next travel, or prompted you to think back over some of your own amusing but maybe less than stellar accommodation experiences too. Everything that didn't kill us makes for a good story, right? A big thanks to my guests, some links for them. First of all, I chatted with Tim Geisler of Nautilus Sailing. You can find out more about what he does at nautilussailing.com. Next, I chatted with James Ward of Rewild Safaris, more about their trips at rewildsafaris.com. And last but not least, I chatted with Russell True of the True Ranch Collection, more details about their dude ranches at trueranchcollection.com. Don't forget to chat about your experiences in the Facebook or LinkedIn groups for Thoughtful Travellers, and to make sure you're signed up for the newsletter at Substack at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. All of these links and more are in the show notes, and you can find them today at notaballerina.com/394. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.